Hi, my name is Tyler Mowry, and welcome to the Writer's Mind Podcast, episode 31. All right, welcome to another episode. If you are looking for the even episodes and episode 32, you can find them on the Patreon, patreon.com/thewritersmind. There's some great episodes over there, so I really recommend you check it out. You're essentially getting double the podcast, so check that out. Today, what I want to talk about is this concept of rules, how they are built, and which ones are real and which ones aren't. So if you think about when you're born and you begin to exist in the world, right? You exist in some sort of nation that has a system of government. So for example, for me, I was born in America. I am operating under the American government. So the American government is built upon the American Constitution, and the Constitution says certain things about the basic rules of how this nation is supposed to operate. And this is a sacred document that we then apply to the government, and this is how we run things. But that's not really true at all. So these man-made rules, like the Constitution, are made by people and enforced by people. And when you have a rule that's made by people and enforced by people, what this means is you have exceptions and you have extreme malleability in whether or not certain rules are carried out or the interpretation in regards to certain rules. So what happens is, hundreds of years ago, some people come together and make the Constitution for America. Fast forward a couple hundred years to today, and the nation that we have now looks nothing like what the Constitution laid out for the nation to be, right? Well, why is that? Well, we have 100x the people, or something like that. We have way more states. We have a much larger government, we have much larger business. Everything has evolved, right? And so laws always change over time because the people who create laws die and new people come, and then those new people interpret the laws how they see them and then essentially do their own thing. So we really don't have any systems that are built upon rules. We just have rulers in a certain time period. And this can be frustrating because a lot of the time, if you were born in America or you're born in a country that has a clear central government, then the idea that, this is how it works and these are the rules and everybody's generally playing to these, that's the narrative that you get. But then once you get older, you slowly start to realize that actually the rules are pretty malleable until the point where, ideally, you realize that actually there are no rules at all, zero. And the whole idea of this is a democracy, or the whole idea that this is a capitalistic society, or this is a blank society, or this is blank, all of this is fake. What we have are people who make rules and enforce rules, and then people who don't. And the only thing that matters as a given time period is the power of particular individuals and their ability to enforce rules and whether or not people will stop them or let them continue doing what they're doing. And so what we see, you can see this in history, right? Where you have cycles in history where people just change the rules in governments. I mean, Rome is built on that idea of this empire trying out being a republic and then becoming a dictatorship and having emperors and having Caesars and this sort of thing. And I think what's interesting that we see in history is that the cleanest, most obviously well-defined system of government becomes a dictatorship. Why? Well, because we know that all the rules are made up and there's one person making up the rules. And if we know who that one person is, then it gives us a better sense of who to blame and who to be angry about and who to overthrow or not overthrow. Now, that's not necessarily... The problem is what we see in history is dictators do all sorts of heinous things and act insanely. But the difference is now, rather than them doing that out in the open, sort of publicly, we just have all of these veils of, oh, we are this kind of country. We operate under these kind of rules. But none of this is really set in stone, and it's all malleable, and it's all moving around. So what does this mean for you? Why am I even telling you this? Well, the reason I think this is valuable is because you as an individual have to understand that certain things that you have allegiance to are not built upon solid foundations. And if you have strong allegiances to different things, it's important for you to do your own due diligence to figure out if certain organizations you are backing actually are really following the rules that they say they are. And I think it's valuable for people in nations to understand that their nation is different than their culture. And just because a nation has rules, that doesn't mean that, or just because your nation houses your culture, it doesn't make that nation's government good. And it doesn't mean that you should follow certain guidelines just because they have been set up by whoever is in power at a given point, right? It's interesting looking through history that we can see again and again and again different points where leaders said, oh, we will never do this thing, whatever that thing is, and then they do that later. Either that leader does it or whoever comes after them makes a change. And so this is frustrating because what it creates is we're in this world where now we have this sort of globalized world where everywhere you go, you are living in a nation that is operating under a set of rules that has a government, right? Which is interesting thinking about the fact that human beings for a very long time were not operating that way at all. They were operating in villages and small groups, essentially where each family had some sort of say in what was going on in their village, in their tribe, and that sort of thing. Or if they didn't like what their particular group was doing, they could always leave because the world was huge and you could always just go somewhere else and set up. But that's not really the case anymore, right? So what we have now is clearly defined systems all over the world where we still have nations, but really we have a globalized world that increasingly becomes more and more global every day. And you just have different groups essentially running different nations that are kind of working together and kind of not. And we have this just totally weird system. And so what happened was we knew when we were in tribes and villages that the rules were kind of made by whoever we allowed to be in charge. And if we wanted to change things, we could. And there weren't really overreaching rules that you as an individual couldn't have some sort of impact on. Now, that isn't to say that there wasn't crazy things happening in tribes and villages, but what I'm saying is there is a wild difference between having a village or tribe of 300 people and a leader there versus having a nation of 400 million people and having a group of leaders for that, right? Your ability to influence what's going on is dramatically higher when there's 400 people here. And of course they were doing, people still had power structure still worked, but everything was clearer in the sense that you knew who was what and how the system operated a little bit more transparently. But now we just have so many people, and we have this world that no longer is big anymore. Our world is pretty small now. There's not a lot of places to go. And everywhere you go, you're going to be involved in some sort of nation, unless you're in Antarctica, which isn't really not a solution. And so you have to learn a new system of existing based upon this idea that there are constant rules everywhere, but also they're all malleable and are all imperfect and built by other people. And so what this means is you can pretty much do whatever you want as long as you figure out how to do that. And so what we see right now is we're kind of in this weird zone where in the middle of the 1900s was probably where the world was very much on its final rise into being a global place. So, World War II probably was the end of the era of nations. And I really think nukes really globalized us, because suddenly, we have these weapons of mass destruction that we can't use because all of us will die. So I guess we need to talk this out. Therefore, let's create these organizations that are globalized and for the long term. And then now, fast forward, we have the internet, which dramatically globalizes us. And then now we're here where we're, with kind of the coronavirus and this sort of thing, we're really seeing the first global action being taken place where the entire world is operating generally under a certain set of rules and operations, where most nations on some level had a COVID policy, and many of the COVID policies were very similar, and many nations used lockdowns and these sorts of things. And so if we're tracking the just evolution of human society, we are really beginning to see the global world manifest in a way that people in 1920 didn't really even comprehend. It's crazier to think about, while that's happening, technology is dramatically increasing. And I think part of that is just the ability for information to move so much faster when you live in a globalized society, that all these different people can be doing all these different things. And we have this radical increase in communication and technology. Like, if you look at the beginning of the 1900s, the Wright brothers built the first plane that flew not really that long ago. 120 years, maybe? Something like that. And so then you fast forward 50 years or 60 years from them, and we have people on the moon. So we went from the first motor plane ever to be made by humanity to work ever. First plane with a motor ever. To then landing human beings on the moon, which is 200,000 miles out into space. And I think what happens is the way that we are learning is not keeping up with that. So using school systems and using these different centralized methods of learning are not very efficient. This is why college seems to be breaking down. There's a big frustration right now with college because the value of what you're getting seems to be decreasing and decreasing and decreasing because the speed of knowledge is going up so quickly, and it is becoming that you can learn so much faster outside of traditional systems. Like so many things I've learned, I would say 85% of the things I've learned in the last 5-6 years have had nothing to do with my traditional education and everything to do with me going and seeking information and then applying that information. And what this creates is not just a lag in how education works, but it also creates a lag in rules and these larger systems, because there's a lag in education, there's a lag in businesses, and there's a lag in the government. And we're in this weird point where it is hard to adapt on a massive scale, right? Adapting billions of people to a new system or a new society is extremely difficult. What's not as difficult is one individual person learning the new rules of the game and then operating within them. And I think that is what your focus should be on. And as you are encountering problems, whether those are laws or within a business or within these other contexts, there usually is a way to navigate through something, even if you don't see that way. Now, am I saying this because I got hit with taxes recently? And I've been thinking about the insanity that is the American tax code? Yes, that is why I'm thinking about this. But it also applies more generally because, like, that's a great example. Even like the American tax code and these sorts of things. These rules are not simple. They are intentionally complex. And you have these entire structures of rules built upon people deciding to create new laws or to add addendums to things and all sorts of things that you don't see, right? Most of the changes happening in government are not the things that they are reporting on the news about, because that's not what's super interesting in this exact moment. It's more interesting to focus on ideological conflict than laws being passed. And that's kind of the purpose, isn't it? To show you what you kind of want to see so that people in charge can do their own thing when you're not watching. But this cycle is getting super rapid now. Or we're seeing like such a huge cycle of centralization versus decentralization, right? Where centralized rules versus people's individual actions are going to really come at a clash, because it gets to a point where you're asking, how can you control and keep this many people in line inside a set of rules? Especially inside a set of rules that are made by people, where people's attention can shift, their focus can shift, what they are enforcing in a given moment can shift, depending on what they feel like they need to advance themselves. All of that can change. And so we're seeing things like a clash between centralized governments and cryptocurrencies, or a clash between people who are moving their citizenship from different nation to different nation and centralized governments. Or we're even seeing this shift between large-scale business versus more decentralized, localized business, right? Where this is happening all over the place in Los Angeles, where people are trying to buy their food from local butchers or farmers markets, and finding local people that are selling goods rather than buying from massive grocery stores or produce companies and these sorts of things. And it's interesting to see how this is going to play out, because centralization benefits the people at the top, decentralization benefits the people at the bottom. And so both of them are incentivized to move against each other, right? The more the people at the top try to create their man-made rules to influence the people at the bottom, the more the people at the bottom try to figure out how they can operate outside of those rules. And there's so many people, so people at the top can't keep up with the just mass amount of people trying to do their own thing. And so I think what we're witnessing is just a really interesting time in history that humanity has never, ever experienced before to our current knowledge of history. Our knowledge of history before this has always been smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller groups of people. Even when we're talking about the great empires of the world. Actually, I'm interested to see I'm going to check the population. I need to get a mic stand. You guys keep bugging me about it. I really just need to do it. I like holding it though. Population of the Roman Empire at its height. Okay, so the population of the Roman Empire at its height was about 60 to 70 million. Oh, wait, is that correct? Yes. Okay. Well, according to Wikipedia, the population peaked at 60 to 70 million, which is crazy. Think about that, right? The population of this great empire that we talk about in all of these history classes was less than 1/4 of America's current population. And that's crazy. Like, think about how big China is. How many people live in China? Billions of people live in China? Billions. Right? It is a huge nation. It is full of people. We have never witnessed this level of scale and technology ever. And so we are really seeing such a huge clash between the difference between like the rules of nature and the rule of law, and that the rule of law is constantly malleable. And what we also see is different nations constantly shifting their rules, and we can watch that happen faster because communication lines are so much quicker. So we can watch a nation way over here change a rule and this one change a rule, and that creates this tension between, it creates the realization that all the rules are made up. And that's a bad realization to have if you are at the top trying to control all the people at the bottom. You want the people at the bottom to believe that the structures that the people at the top have built are firm and unchanging. And they've always been this way. They always will be this way. But if people get a sense that things are just constantly changing and people at the top decide what happens on a given day, I don't think that sits well with people. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I think we are living in one of the most interesting times to be alive. And if I were you, I would take advantage of that fact and of the fact that you are interested in writing and keep track of what's going on. Pay attention and search things out that seem interesting. So that's what I have for you today. I hope that was fun, and I'll see you guys next week.